just wanted to say this is for my daughter. I'm going to be reading The Hobbit. I don't own any of the rights. I'm currently reading the book to her, and I wanted to read books. And I figured if someone wants to listen to it and they like my voice, they can listen along. Let's start from the beginning. Currently, my daughter is 3, and we are on page 212. I actively read to help a speech impediment I've had for a long time. My name is Bub, and hopefully I'll continue to do this. Let's see how it goes. Alright, this is the copy of The Hobbit I have. It's one of my favorite books of all time. And it's something I always wanted to read to my child whenever they were born, because it was a book that was very special to me growing up. And what is a hobbit? Hobbits are little people, smaller than dwarves. They love peace and quiet and good-tilled earth. They dislike machines, but they are handy with tools. They are nimble and don't like to hurry. They have sharp ears and eyes. They are inclined to be fat. They wear bright colors, but seldom wear shoes. They like to laugh and eat 6 meals a day and drink. They like parties, and they like to give and receive presents. They inhabit a land they call the Shire, a place between the river Brandywine and the far downs. The Hobbit is a story of these delightful creatures, a story complete in itself, yet full of portent. For this is a book that tells of Bilbo Baggins, a far-wandering hobbit who discovered, some say stole, the one ring of power and brought it back to the Shire. And this is the absolute necessary beginning to the great story of the War of the Rings, which J.R.R. Tolkien completes in his epic fantasy trilogy, The Lord of the Rings. Alright, we're just going to get to the book. If you want to read the rest, buy a copy. Not you, Mo. This will be yours. And for reference, this is the map inside this edition. That right there looks very familiar for something else. Oh, and here's the Vinderland. And this is chapter 1. My throat is kind of rough. Just took her out to the park for we went to 3 parks yesterday, a lot of pollen. So I'll just take a drink. Alright. The unexpected party. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened onto a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with paneled walls and floors tiled and carpeted. Provided with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats, the hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly, but not quite straight into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people for many miles round called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on another, not going upstairs for the hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, the lots of them. Wardrobes, he had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side going in, for these were the only ones to have windows, deep-set round windows looking over his garden and meadows beyond. Sloping down to the river, this hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighborhood of the hill for time out of mind, and people considered them very respectable, not only because most of them were rich, but also because they had never had any adventure or did anything unexpected. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without the bother of asking him. This is a story of how a Baggins had an adventure, and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost the neighbor's respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of this particular hobbit. What is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays, since they have become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There is little or no magic about them, except the ordinary everyday sort of everyday sort which helps them to disappear quickly and quietly when large, stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like an elephant's which can hear a mile off. The mother of this particular hobbit. What is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays, since they become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There's little or no magic about them, except the ordinary, everyday sort which helps them disappear quickly and quietly when large, stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like elephants, which they can hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colors, chiefly green and yellow, wear no shoes, and because their feet grow naturally leathery soles and thick, warm brown hair like the stuff of their heads, which is curly, have long, clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deep, fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now you know enough to go on with. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit, of Bilbo Baggins that is, was the fabulous Belladonna Took, one of the three remarkable daughters of the Took, head of the hobbits who lived across the water, a small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It is often said in other families that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly there was still something not entirely hobbit-like about them, and once in a while members of the Took clan would go and have adventures. They discreetly disappeared, and the family hushed it up. But the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses. And the Took, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took had any adventures after she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins. Bungo, that was Bilbo's father, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her, and partly with her money, that was to be found either under the hill or over the hill or across the water. And there they remained at the end of their days. Still, it was probably that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit queer in the makeup from the Took side. Something that only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived. Until Bilbo Baggins was grown up. Being about 50 years old or so, living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I have described for you, until he had in fact apparently settled down immovably. By some curious chance one morning long ago, in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast morning smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, neatly brushed. Gandalf came by. Gandalf! If you ever heard of a quarter of what I've heard about him, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprout up all over the place and wherever we went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down the way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend, the old Took, died. In fact, and the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. It had been way over the hill and across the water on business of his own, since they were small hobbit boys and girls. All that unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall pointed blue hat, a long gray coat, a silver scarf over which a white beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining and the grass was very green. But Gandalf looked at him from under his long bushy eyebrows and stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning? Or you mean it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good this morning, or that it is a morning to be good on?" "All of them at once," said Bilbo. and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a full of mine. There's no hurry. We have all the day before us. Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful gray ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated over the hill. Very pretty, said Gandalf, but I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share in an adventure that I am arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone. I should think so in these parts. We are plain quiet folk, and have no use for adventures, nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. I can't think what anybody sees in them, said our Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another, even bigger smoke ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. He had decided that he was not quite his sort and wanted him to go away, but the old man did not move. He stood leaning on his stick and gazing at the Hobbit without saying anything, till Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and even a little cross. Good morning, he said at last. We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill and across the water. By this he meant that the conversation was at an end. What a lot of things you do use good morning for, said Gandalf. Now you mean that you want to get rid of me, and that it won't be good till I move off. Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see. I don't think I know your name. Yes, my dear sir. And I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and you do know my name, though you don't remember that I belong to it. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be a good morninged by Belladonna Took's son, as if I was selling buttons at the door. Gandalf, good gracious me. Not the wandering wizard that gave old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till ordered. Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants and the rescue of princesses and the unexpected luck of widows' sons. Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks. I remember those. Old Took used to have them on the Midsummer's Eve. Splendid. They used to go up like great lilies and snapdragons and laburnums of fire and hang in the twilight all evening. You will notice already that Mr. Baggins was not quite all so prosy as he liked to be believed. Also that he was very fond of flowers. Dear me, he went on. Not the Gandalf who is responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures. Anything from climbing trees to visiting elves, or sailing in ships, sailing to other shores. Bless me. Life used to be quite you used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon. But I have no idea you were still in business. Where should I be, said the wizard. All the same, I am pleased to find you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly at any rate, and it is not without hope. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you asked for. I beg your pardon, I haven't asked for anything. Yes, you have, twice now, my pardon. I give it to you. In fact, I will go so far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and profitable too. Very likely you will, if you ever get over it. Sorry, I don't want any adventures, thank you. Not today, good morning. But please come to tea anytime you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye. And with that, the Hobbit turned and scuttled inside his round green door, and shut it as quickly as he dared. Not to seem rude, wizards, after all, are wizards. What on earth did I ask him for tea for? He said to himself as he went to the pantry. He had only just had breakfast, but he thought a cake or two and a drink of something would do him good after his fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still standing outside the door, laughing long but quietly. After a while he stepped up, and with the spike of his staff scratched a queer sign on the Hobbit's beautiful green front door. Then he strode away, just in time for when Bilbo was finishing his second cake and beginning to think that he had escaped adventures very well. The next day he had almost forgotten that he did not remember things very well, unless he put them down in an engagement tablet. Like this, Gandalf, Tea Wednesday. Yesterday he had been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time, there came a tremendous ring on the front doorbell, and he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle, and put out another cup and saucer, and and an extra cake or two, and ran to the door. I am sorry to keep you waiting, he was going to say, when he saw that it was not Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf with a blue beard tucked in his golden belt, and very bright eyes under a dark green hood. As soon as the door opened, he pushed inside, just as he had been expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg. Dwaylen at your service, he said with a low bow. Bilbo Baggins at yours, said the hobbit, too surprised to ask questions for the moment. When the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he added, I am just about to take tea. Pray come and have some with me. A little stiff perhaps, but he meant it kindly. And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung his things up in the hall without a word or explanation? They had not been at the table long, in fact. They had hardly reached the third cake when came another even louder ring at the bell. Excuse me, said the hobbit, and off he went to the door. So you have got here at last, was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf at the steps with a white beard and scarlet hood, and he too hopped inside as soon as the doors opened, just as he had been invited. I see they have begun to arrive already, he said as he caught Dwaylen's green hood hanging up. He hung his red one next to it. And Balin at your service, he said with his hand on his breast. Thank you, said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but they had begun to arrive, had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived. He preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and he was, as the host, he knew his duty to stock to it, however painful, he might have to go without. Come along and have tea, he managed to say after taking a deep breath. A little beer would suit me better. It was all the same to you, my good sir, said Balin with his white beard, but I don't mind some cake. Seed cake, if you have any. Lots, said Bilbo, found himself answering, to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off, too, to the cellar to fill a pint beer mug, and to the pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes, which he had baked that afternoon for his after-supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwaylen were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them, when loud came a ring at the bell again, and then another ring. Gandalf for certain this time, he thought as he puffed along the passage. But it was not. It was 2 more dwarves, both in blue hoods, silver belts, yellow beards, and some of each carried a bag of tools and a spade. And they hopped as soon as the door began to open. Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. What can I do you for, my dwarves, he said. Keely at your service, said the one, and Philly, added the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. At yours and your families, replied Bilbo. He remembered his manners this time. Dwaylen and Balin, here already, I see, said Keely. Let's join the throng. Throng, said Mr. Baggins. I don't like the sound of that. I must really sit down for a moment and collect my wits and have a drink. I've only had just a sip in the corner while the 4 dwarves sat around the table and talked about mines and gold and troubles with goblins, and the depredations of dragons and lots of other things, which he did not understand and did not want to, for they sounded much too adventurous. When, I'm gonna get this right, ding dong a ling dang, his bell rang again, as some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. Someone at the door, he said, blinking. Some 4, I should say, by the sound, said Philly. Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance. The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands, and wondered what all had happened. And what was going to happen, and whether they all would stay to supper. Then the bell rang louder than ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all, it was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He had barely turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, "At your service," one after other. Dory, Nori, Ori, and Oin. And Gloin were their names, and soon, 2 purple hoods, a gray hood, a brown hood, and a white hood, were hanging on the pegs. And off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already, it was almost become a throng. Some called for ale, some called for porter, and one called for coffee. All of them called for cakes. So the hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had just been set in the hearth. The seed cakes were gone, and the dwarfs were starting on the round of buttered scones. When there came a loud knock. Not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage, very angrily and altogether bewildered and bewildered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he had ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of another. More doors, 4 of them, and there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked at the secret mark that he had put there the morning before. Carefully, he said. It is not like you, Bilbo, to keep my friends waiting on the mat. And then he opened the door like a pop gun. Let me introduce Bifur, Bofer, Bomber, and especially Thorin. At your service, said Bifur and Bofer, Bomber standing in a row. Then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a long pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. The last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf. In fact, no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Bifur, Bofer, and Bomber on top of them. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin, indeed, was very haughty, and he said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said that he was very sorry so many times, and at last he grunted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. "Now we are all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, and best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. "Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. Was that tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, thanks. I think for me." "And for me," said Thorin. "And raspberry jam and apple tart," said Bifur. "And mince pies and cheese," said Bofer. "And pork pie and salad," said Bomber. "And more cakes and ale and coffee, if you don't mind." Hold on 1 second. Called the other doors through the door. Alright. I think I'm going to stop there. My throat's a little rough. And we are at about 23 minutes. So this is a test, and I'll try editing next. I've never done it. So bear with me. Like I said, this is a passion project. It's going to be rough cuts. If you like it, great. If you don't, not for you. But if you like it, it can be for you. Alright, signing off. Take care. Have a good day.